I want to very briefly introduce our panel, but first say to anybody who's in this audience, I know John asked how many people have seen Waiting for Superman, but that clip, that trailer gives you a little flavor for it, and if you haven't seen the movie, there's nothing more important you could do in the next days, weeks, and months than to go see Waiting for Superman. It's an incredibly powerful film and incredibly important, and it touches on the first layer of the conversation we want to have today. This is Davis Guggenheim to my right, who directed Waiting for Superman as well as An Inconvenient Truth. To his right is Ted Mitchell, who's the president and CEO of NewSchools Venture Fund, as well as being the president of the California Board of Education. And to the far right, Diana Rhoten, who's one of the founding partners of Startl, which is an accelerator for learning, for companies, startups that use new technology in the learning space. We're going to talk to all of you guys and try to cover a lot of ground here in a relatively short period of time. Davis, I want to start with you. This movie came out in September. You've been everywhere, all over the country, in a lot of school districts, in a lot of classrooms, on a lot of television shows. And one of the things that, from the beginning about Waiting for Superman, that held such promise, I think, was that it comes at a moment when a lot of people who have been pushing for education reform, for fundamental change in the system, feel as though we've kind of reached a tipping point where this has become an issue that people can no longer ignore, and where there's a critical mass for change. So I want to start the conversation on a kind of optimistic note. Right. And I want you to talk about your experience for these last months around this movie, and tell us about the signs that you've received as you've gone around that validate that sense that change is upon us and change is possible.
Well, that's an excellent question. I think in the reform community, the community that Ted and Diana live in, there's great optimism. There are high-performing charters that are doing extremely well. There are great programs in district schools that are doing really well. And there's a new generation of what I call pragmatists that have said, let's stop talking about it, let's go and do it, whatever it takes from different angles, but it's now possible. These ideas that poor kids can't learn, that kids of color can't learn, that those parents don't care, those things are shattered in that world, in the reform world. So they now know it's possible, and where 10 years ago I'm not sure they knew it was possible. The problem is that the reform community is a small slice, and there's a huge slice of people who just don't know that that's happening. It was the same thing with Inconvenient Truth, where there was a consensus among scientists that the writing was on the wall, that global warming is real, and we were causing it, but the rest of the world didn't know about it, or still thought there was a controversy. And I think we still have a lot way to go in public education to make people feel like it's a lot less controversial than it is. So the big idea of the movie is to bring more people to the table, more people to help the reformers like Ted, and to help people like Diana who are doing this incredible stuff, to say we're in this tipping point. Now we have to get momentum to push it over.
Ted, I just want you to actually answer the same question in some sense. You've been in this fight for longer than Davis has, and for longer than a lot of people have been. What's your sense about, given that historical context, what's your sense about where we are in terms of this moment and the possibility for making really significant changes?
Yep. So I'm entirely with Davis that the reform community has been about this for a while, and Diana is pushing the envelope around that. And John, you're right. The most important thing anybody can do is go see Waiting for Superman, and Davis has done an extraordinary job highlighting the possibilities of great schools in troubled neighborhoods doing amazing things for kids, just blowing out of the water this concept that poor kids can't learn. So we're done with that now in America. And I think that the movie is putting a punctuation mark on that, and it's now our responsibility to move from that position out kind of into the next frontier. All right, we've established that poor kids can learn. We've established some of the rules by which great charter schools can operate, great district schools can operate. Let's bring everybody up to that mark, but let's not stop there. Let's push to the next frontier.
Diana, I want you to talk very briefly. I want you to tell people what Startl is and what it does, but more after doing that, give us a sense of where the startup market is in this area, which is to say there's been a lot of talk about innovative companies that are going to be coming online for the last few years. It seems like that's actually also reached critical mass too, where there's a lot of new companies that are starting up and a lot of interest in the venture sector in terms of funding those companies. So give us an overview of that, of the market opportunities for companies that are like pushing the envelope on breakthrough technology and learning.
Sure. So Startl launched just in January this year, and our goal is to stimulate and accelerate new technological innovations for learning. And so we have a very particular slice of this problem. We're a small entity taking a small slice, trying to do with a big vision, we like to say. And so the ed tech, quote unquote, market in the 90s was very much about large infrastructure plays that help schools run more efficiently. That market's established, it exists, it's functioning, it's healthy. What we're trying to do at Startl is push along the emerging market, which focuses on lighter weight technologies that help learners of all ages learn more effectively. And we look at it both as an in-school and out-of-school problem. So the analogy that we use that seems to resonate is we're trying to do for this space what Sundance did for the independent film community. So we recruit really strong talent. We nurture promising but highly disruptive ideas. We build quality double bottom line companies in this space, and then we try to broker smart investments for them. As I said, we've been alive since January of this year, and it's been amazing to me, and Ted, you know this better than I do. When we first came into this space, we were sort of out there on our own, and apart from NewSchools Venture Fund. And then in the last 9 months, particularly the last 3 months, we've seen an incredible race to this market. So I'll just give you a little bit of a sense, between January of 2009 and September of 2010, there were 75 venture deals, and that does not include any mergers and acquisitions, nor does it include any seed or angel investments. It's about $620 million. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot compared to other sectors, but it's a pretty significant increase from the year prior, or certainly the 5 years prior. And then I'll just say between September and November, the news of the week this week, of course, is Murdoch and Joel Klein partnering up. That's going to be a significant amount of money we anticipate. I'm not privileged to let you know the details, but there will be a well-known investment firm making their first investment in learning that will be announced within the week. So we see new investors, new investments racing to this space. Anecdotally, I can tell you my inbox is overrun with entrepreneurs who are seeking, applications to my programs or just advice and inquiries. So it's a hot market right now, and we hope that it doesn't boil over too quickly.
So those are all, that's, as I said, I was going to ask an optimistic question that you could all can answer in an optimistic way. I'm now going to shift gears and focus on a slightly darker picture, which, Davis, I'll return to your experience in the last 4 months. You have spent a lot of time, as I said, going around the country, right. And a lot of people saying, wow, this movie is great, and it's going to change the world, and this is all fantastic, and then a whole bunch of other people saying that you are the devil. And you've been attacked, you've been pilloried, you've run into more buzzsaws than at a lumber factory. Talk about what you have learned in the last 4 months. You knew before this movie came out that the entrenched forces of the status quo, right. In particular the teachers' unions, would not necessarily love Waiting for Superman. But you've learned in the last 4 months that it's not just that they haven't loved it, but that they have fought back in a very aggressive way. So talk about that, just so that people recognize that as much momentum as there is for change, there are still huge impediments to breaking through and overcoming some of the forces of stasis in education.
Well, I would start with the headline that the group of pragmatists and reformers is strong and growing and has all the momentum, and the wind is at their back for the first time, I think, in a very long time. So I'm still optimistic. But what you just said, I don't think we estimated the power of the status quo wanting to stay the way it is. It's called the status quo, right? it comes in many different forms. You know, Michelle Rhee talks about how the system is built for harmony amongst adults.
That's the former chancellor of the DC schools.
Yeah, so harmony amongst adults, it's, you know, for a lot of people, it's jobs, you know, and that's a real thing, particularly in cities that have, tight budgets, and there are people who want to keep their jobs, and that's a real thing, and it needs to be done delicately, because there's still management issues, there's huge bureaucratic issues, there's teacher issues that all have to be dealt with if you're going to reform the schools, and that's a really hard. And then there's vested organizations like the unions that just don't want change, and they've got a lot of money, and they can pour a lot of money in distorting the conversation, and that's happened to the movie, I think, where people have categorized it in such a way, pro this, anti that, where whole schools decide not to see the movie because it's categorized a certain way, and that's a shame, because, you know, if you see the film, it's not meant to be the complete, you know, it's a 90-minute movie. Public education deserves a 30-part miniseries if you're really going to get into it. The whole idea is that this is a movie about the kids and how we're failing too many kids, and it's a wake-up call. But the fact that the perception of the film has been distorted, I think, shows the challenge of people who just don't want it to change. I would say the other thing is that I think there are barriers that all of us have, which are more insidious. Those of us who want great public schools, those of us who aren't vested interests, there's still those feelings when you drive by the inner city school and you say, well, it can't be done. Those kids can't learn. Yes, I've heard about the schools that Ted works in and that are in the movie, but, you know, the parents in our movie, those are the ones that care. And I think the truth is that every parent cares as much as me and my wife care about our kids. So there's these psychological barriers that we all have to get by. So those are the things that we're working against. And those forces versus, I think, an incredibly exciting time for a new generation of reformers that came out of Teach for America, came out of the business world, that are proving that it's possible. So it's kind of like which forces are really going to prevail in the next 10 years.
Ted, one of the things that's happened with Davis's movie, just to put a not too fine a point on it, is that unions have attacked the film as being anti-teacher.
Right.
I think that no one who is a fair-minded viewer of this film, whatever you think of its strengths and weaknesses, would come away with that view. You could not see the movie and think this is an attack on teachers. You could think that it was an attack on teachers' unions, but not an attack on teachers. You've been on both the traditional side of education at the Board of Ed. You know what these forces are. The unions are still very strong in the country in a lot of places, but there is a sense in some places, in some particular districts, in particular states, that they are beginning to see the writing on the wall. So I want you to focus a little bit on the question of whether, though there's this very fierce opposition to change at the public face, whether behind the scenes, whether there is actually now some movement that's happening, and particularly in certain unions, that is actually opening the door to progress.
Yep. So I think the bottom line answer, headline answer is yes. I think that the writing is on the wall, and that progressive union leaders understand that the best way for them to influence the future is to be a part of making it and not simply saying no. Randy Weingarten, who is in the film, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, has actually issued a pretty decent statement about using student performance information in the evaluation of teachers. So I think that there's something to build on there. But I want to, John, your point at the very beginning about whether this is a moment in time or not, I do think that this is a moment in time. Davis is right. The wind is at the reformers' back. NewSchools builds early stage organizations, education entrepreneurs, builds them into strong, sustainable organizations outside of the usual district and the state framework. And we think that that's a terrifically important strategic set of strategic initiatives, because it establishes in the market of education independent organizations that aren't subject to the pull and haul of politics or the next school board election, but organizations that are there for the long run. So the charter organizations that we've helped start would, if you added up all of those kids, be the 33rd largest school district in the country. And the example of teachers going to work every day in those schools, of being treated like professionals, it sets a model that the teachers' unions and others have to look at. It's not an accident that when charter schools are out looking for teachers, they get hundreds of applications from the traditional schools, from union members who want to come and work in a freer environment where they have more autonomy and more ability to determine their own fate.
Diana, one of the things that Davis's film, and we could spend a lot of time talking about the things that are in the film and about the nature, a lot of the reform, as Ted just mentioned, and Davis mentioned earlier, charter schools have been the kind of vanguard of reform, but that has very much been for changing schools within the paradigm of existing schooling. What you said at the beginning, and what I know you're working on is going beyond that paradigm, going on beyond trying to drive change, not necessarily within the existing structure of schooling, but thinking in a broader way about learning. I want you to talk about that and talk about, in particular, where we are now in terms of technology makes possible in terms of that kind of innovation.
Sure. So I find it interesting that Davis talks about this small slice of the reformers with the wind at our backs. And implicitly, if not explicitly, in the job of Startl is to convince stakeholders who do not see themselves as stakeholders in the learning space to become active. And that's a lot of you guys out there. So when we talk about what we're doing at Startl, we're very focused on the notion of learning. And the difference for us, it sounds semantic, but it's not. So schooling happens between the hours of 8 and 3. Traditionally, it's 28 kids in a classroom, 1,500 square feet, one teacher, in 45-minute blocks. I think as long as we continue to think about education in those design parameters, we're not going to push the envelope, and we're not going to break open something that is failing. I mean, we see it in all of the data. 30% of high school kids leave schools, as high as 50% in urban centers. I mean, if it were any other market, we would be responding in spades, right? So I think we need to rethink what we're talking about, and that doesn't mean abandoning schools, but it means rethinking what are the institutions and the tools and the experiences that make up a kid's life and that tie together all of the learning opportunities out there for him or her. This is not a new conversation. Dewey was talking about this in 1925, but what's unique about this particular moment is, for the first time ever, we have the technological power at a cost that is affordable that can actually tie all of those experiences and sites of learning together to create, a well-integrated set of learning activities, a performance record that goes well beyond those hours of 8 to 3 and that 1,500 square foot classroom. And it's not just the portability of technology. I mean, I'm a big fan of mobile. We do a lot of work on mobile learning at Startl. But it's not just the portability of those devices, it's actually the power of those devices to personalize the learning experiences and tether all of the data together.
Ted, I know, NewSchools has traditionally been associated with charters, and what you guys did for the funds now, the organization's been around for a decade now, right? Mostly what you've done previously is raise funds and then invest in charter organizations. I know what you're thinking about next is very much along the lines of what Diana's thinking about. Your next fund, what you're raising now, I believe, and I'm sure you can't talk about that too much, but I know you're focused on moving beyond the classroom and moving beyond charters. So talk about, following on from Diana, talk about how you guys are going to try to make that vision real.
Yep. So we started out 10 years ago with a broad portfolio of organizations, and actually chose to go deep on charters in our second and our third fund, because we thought that the promise of the charter movement wasn't to charterize every school, but to create a set of experiments from which we would learn in preparation for kind of the technological opportunities and other political opportunities that we hoped would emerge. We think we're there. And so the NewSchools Next Fund is explicitly named our Innovation Fund. And we're aiming to take advantage of the political wind at our back, the rebound in the economy, the changes in technology that really do make things very different, sets a whole new ground for kids and for adults. And I want to come back to that in just a second. But we do now have the capacity to create adaptive learning systems that in real time put the right challenges in front of kids and guide them toward mastery of a subject. I just have the privilege of newly on the board of the Khan Academy that most of you know, and working with that team to think through how direct-to-student mastery-based learning can completely eliminate the need for 45-minute blocks and periods. It can completely change the way we think about the architecture of school, and it completely liberates us from the tyranny of time and the clock. And so that's one kind of opportunity that we see ahead of us in the innovation space. But adults too. The technology now is enabling adults to deal with each other and with kids in different ways. Teaching for 100 years has been regarded as a solitary profession. It was seen as kind of a school was an egg crate, right, where there were just these different little classrooms up and down the rows, and as soon as the door closed, the teacher was on their own. Guess what? Social networking is making teaching an incredibly social, interactive, mutually reinforcing game. One of the organizations that we're supporting, Better Lesson, is a lesson sharing and social networking site that already is transforming the teaching experience for teachers, allowing them to work together in virtual collaboration. So what I think that Davis has done in Waiting for Superman is he has shown us what Education Reform 1.0 has been able to do. Maximize the production function of what we know of as school. So again, we know how to do that. As Jonathan Alter says in the movie, once you know that you can do that, why would you do anything else? Right. We should all be helping schools and districts and charters and parochial schools get to that maximizing point of education reform 1.0. But where NewSchools is interested now is in 2.0, just as we're drawn here together every year. So what is 2.0? And 2.0, we believe, is about distributed, customized, adaptive technologies for adults and students based on mastery of skills, not on process-based outcomes.
Davis, I'm going to give you just a very, very brief 1 minute to answer this question because I want to save some time for questions and answers. But when you hear people who I know you like Ted and Diana, talking about in the ways that they talk about this, all very attractive, sexy-sounding technology, and then you think about the kids that are in Waiting for Superman. One of them is from Redwood City, and the rest are from serious centers of urban poverty around the country where the schools are not only they're dysfunctional, they're anti-functional, they're total sinkholes. I mean, how much does what you hear from these guys sound like really nice talk, but that has no real applicability, that's sort of like just pie in the sky relative to the needs of students who are most at risk in our system now?
Well, I don't think it's pie in the sky at all. I think it's like these changes are going to happen, and they're going to be wonderful, and they're going to be breakthrough. One of the things, when we talk about Emily, is this white middle class 8th grader who's from Redwood City, 30 miles from here. And one of the themes of that is that some of the suburban schools are not as good as we think they are. They're only serving people in the upper tract. That upper tract gets served pretty well, and there's this middle 75% which gets lost. When I hear Ted and Diana talk, I think, I go back to the scene in the movie which says, our schools haven't changed in 50 years, but the world around them has. So, and that's true for the 1.0 version. I love that analogy. So they haven't changed to the 1.0 analogy, and they're certainly not ready to change to the 2.0 analogy. There's still rules, district rules and union rules in place that defines instruction as a student at a desk listening to a teacher, and their credits are given accordingly. And so you don't get credit, you don't get real teaching time if it's not defined that way. So, I think the teachers are ready to change. Yep. They're desperate for this kind of stuff. But it goes back to some of the themes in the movie. The district rules and the union contracts have to be changed on a political and contract level to allow some of these opportunities to happen.
I want to take Q&A now. If there's anybody out there who has any questions, please step up to the microphones. If not, I'm going to keep going with a couple more here. Do we have anybody out there who has anything to ask these guys? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So I think when you talk about 1.0 reform. Obviously, in D.C., many people thought that the election was about sort of whether or not Michelle Rhee was right, and reform had a place there and was soundly defeated. And I guess I wondered what you thought of the election and how much it makes the D.C. school system backslide.
Just to be clear for anybody in the audience who doesn't know this story, Michelle Rhee was the school's chancellor in Washington, D.C., was seen as a hero of reformers. She was very closely tied to the mayor of D.C., who was then defeated in a primary in September. And the school reform was very much a hot issue in that primary. Adrian Fenty, the mayor's defeat, was in many quarters blamed on Michelle Rhee having pushed the envelope too hard in the course of her tenure in Washington, D.C. So having said that, just as background for anybody who doesn't know, Davis, please.
There's no doubt that what Michelle Rhee, in my opinion, was doing was incredible. I was in D.C. for a lot of the times she was there, and the reforms were incredible. You know, schools were getting for the first time a PE teacher, a nurse, an arts teacher for the very first time because of the harsh things that she was doing. She was shutting down schools. The problem is that a lot of the families, poor families, even though the schools were failing, they were seeing a school being shut down that was their school. And even if the school isn't working, something's being taken away from them. And they have to go further to go to a better school. That story, I don't think, was told well enough to them. Right. And I think it's true, and the challenge for Cory Booker with Mark Zuckerberg's thing is that how are you going to engage local citizens that have not seen great public schools for 3 generations? How do you get them involved in seeing that these changes are actually good for you? But there's no doubt that if you're going to reform these schools, you're going to have to do some tough things. You're going to have to change a lot of management. You're going to have to you're going to have to assess the quality of teachers, and the ones that are, really not working, you have to find them another job. Those are really tough choices, and those were, but there's no doubt that those things have improved the lives of kids in D.C., and that's a real tragedy. The other piece of it is, the American Federation of Teachers spent $1 million to get Mayor Fenty out of office. So there's vested, and to me that's terrible. That the dues of teachers paid to set reform back. So those are 2 really strong forces, status quo forces, that are pushing against real reform, and they'll continue to do that in other cities.
And then I guess Ted said something interesting a couple of minutes ago about sort of taking it out of the political realm, right?
So 30% of kids every morning in D.C. wake up and go to charter schools. And I think that the Fenty-Rhee election really does demonstrate, from a NewSchools perspective anyway, the importance of an independent entrepreneurial sector that is not vulnerable to a primary vote or the 4th vote on a 7-person school board. And so for us, the election was a reason to double down in increasing the effectiveness and the public effectiveness of that independent sector so that we can help build the demand among the parent community for high-quality schools, which starts with being able to recognize it, being able to walk into that neighborhood school and saying, this is not the quality of school that I want for my kids.
We are sadly out of time. I'm gonna have to wrap with. I just want to wrap with a 30-second answer from you, Diana. In terms of what Ted just said, in terms of igniting that entrepreneurial community, there's a lot of activity out there, especially in terms of a lot of money swarming around this sector. What do you think in 30 seconds needs to happen for that market to come to real fruition?
So I will just say that using the 1.0, 2.0 analogy, I think if we don't accelerate the 2.0 reform here, we are going to miss this window of opportunity. I think accelerating the 2.0 reform is going to actually accelerate the 1.0 reform. And I fundamentally believe if we don't get the involvement of the technology community, the design community, in partnership with the education community, we will miss the responsibility and the opportunity of this market. And right now, the ed tech market crashed in the 90s because we had money flooding in with the wrong expectations about returns. And so we need to we don't have enough horses in this race right now. There's money for these new technologies. We need you guys to build the better, more products. that deserve those monies, because we will, if we end up investing in the products that really don't push 2.0, we're going to end up in the same place that we ended in the 90s.
Thank you guys so much. It was a really great conversation, and you guys are going to be around for anybody who wants to carry on these conversations offline. Thanks very much, all of it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Diana.